Today's lesson is on the use of rooks. If you can use your rooks powerfully, that's as important in a chess game as using your queen well. We know that a knight and a bishop are worth 3 pawns, and that a rook is worth 5, and a queen is worth 9 pawns. Well, that means that if you use your 2 rooks effectively, that's 10 points of power being used effectively. And that's more important, in fact, than using your queen effectively, because that's only worth 9 pawns. So if you're using your rooks in an expert fashion and your opponent is not, it's almost like having an extra queen. So it's important to know how to use rooks and where they belong and what to do with rooks. To illustrate how to use your rooks powerfully, I've chosen a game by a famous attacking player. He's a current player called Shirov, and he's playing white against a player called Lipinski. So let's have a look at the game and see why it's a good illustration of powerful rooks. So Shirov playing white starts with e4, moves his king pawn out, and black responds with e5. So they're both trying to control the center. And now f4. This is called the King's Gambit. This is a very aggressive way to start a game of chess. Shirov has a book full of games, and it's called Fire on Board. He has a reputation as a very good attacking player with lots of sacrifices. And this opening is not so common these days because it's very risky and you give up material and very, very complicated positions. So Shirov's starting with probably the most aggressive way to start a chess game that there is. And Lipinski accepts the pawn, takes the King's Gambit pawn, and Shirov develops a knight. And now Lipinski makes sure he hangs on to the pawn by playing g5. He now supports this pawn, and he's also got his queen guarding this pawn. So he's going to hang on to his pawn, but the pawn that he's got is distracted from the center, and so far he's made 2 pawn moves, and he's already starting to weaken his king's position with these pawn moves. So Shirov rapidly develops his pieces. Bishop straight out onto the weak spot, which is classical sort of attacking style or method in the King's Gambit. And now g4, attacking the knight again with the pawn. And this is an interesting position. And it's a strange sort of move, g4. It's another pawn move instead of developing pieces. It's a little bit too aggressive considering that none of the back row pieces for black have been developed yet. And Shirov shows his genius here. He castles, so he gives up his knight. Lipinski grabs the knight, and Shirov plays queen takes. When he castled, he developed this rook. This rook is now developed, and when he recaptured with the queen, he developed his queen. So we've got 3 pieces for Shirov developed, and no pieces for Lipinski. But Lipinski's a whole piece ahead. Now this file here has no white pawns on it. And rooks become powerful on files with no pawns. So it's moving towards becoming what's called an open file, a file with no pawns. Lipinski develops his queen onto that file. And he's starting to get his pieces developed. And he needs to get his king safe. If he can get his king safe, he'll win because he's ahead on material. Now e5, attacking that queen. And offering up yet another pawn. Lipinski keeps grabbing all the material, takes the pawn, and if white had control of this square, then this would be a problem for Lipinski because he'd be able to play his rook onto e1 and pin the queen. So the king and the queen are on an open file, that's a file with no pawns on it, and because of that, there's a lot of danger for the black pieces. And so Shirov now grabs the pawn at f7. Bishop takes f7 check, so he gives up yet another piece. He gave up the e pawn when the queen captured it to open up the board, open up the e file. And now he's made another sacrifice of his bishop for 2 reasons. The main one is that he ensures that the king will not be able to castle to a safe position. And it also continues to open up the F file, which now has only one pawn on it, which is a black pawn. So another sacrifice. Amazing chess. The king takes. And he's out in the open now, so it's certainly game on for Shirov. He must find a checkmate or he'll lose on material. And now he plays d4. Attacks the queen and gives up yet another pawn. Queen takes pawn check. And this is a clever move by Shirov. The reason he's given up this pawn is twofold. Now we have an open file near the king, and so he knows he'll be able to use a rook powerfully there. But he also sees a way to develop yet another attacker, yet another back row piece into the game with tempo, what's called with tempo, in other words, with an attack. What he plays is bishop e3, and this is a very interesting move. It attacks the queen, and at the same time it gets the bishop off the back row. The pawn can't take the bishop because it's pinned. If the pawn took the bishop, it would be checked from the queen, so it's not allowed, that move. And so the queen is forced to move away, and Shirov is one piece, or has got an extra attacker into the game for the cost of one pawn. The queen went back to f6, and now the bishop took the pawn. So now this is a completely open file, which is exactly where the rook belongs. And on that file, you've got a black king in line with a black queen. And this is a very dangerous situation for the black pieces. So Lipinski's best try was to get his king off that open file with heavy pieces, rooks and queens on it. And he's trying to get his king tucked away to safety, probably heading for d8 to find some sort of shelter from the attack. So Shirov now develops his knight, so he brings another attacker into the game. He's got 4 developed pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4 versus 1. And this king can't castle. So he can't castle this this king here. So an interesting position. Lipinski now brings his knight out, and he's hoping that it will assist with the defense. He's got to get his pieces into the game. Shirov took a look around the board and plays knight d5. So he brings his knight up further into the attack, and it's attacking this pawn at the same time attacking this queen. So it's a fork, and because it's attacking the queen, again, he brings a piece further into the attack. It's come from here, right up into the center of the board with tempo again. It's attacking the queen. And so, once again, black has to make a defensive move that doesn't develop his pieces. It doesn't get more attacking power into the game. So the queen comes over to g6, and now Shirov develops his other rook. So, bang, check. And now look at this rook, how powerful it is. It's on an open file, a file with no pawns. It's attacking all the way down the board. This rook is also attacking all the way down the board. So these are very, very, very powerful rooks. Now, Shirov's given up some pieces. He's given up 2 whole pieces and some pawns. But these 2 rooks here, 10 points of power, are very, very active. Here's 10 points of power doing absolutely nothing. And so the point of the situation is this. These rooks are powerful, and so even though he's sacrificed some pieces, he's actually got more active pieces in the game than his opponent. So he's given himself a very good chance to cause a checkmate. So again, when the piece at the rook at e1 came into the game, it came into the game with check. So once again, black doesn't get a chance to also develop a piece. He has to respond defensively, or the piece he develops at least is in a defensive position. And so he plays his bishop to e7, blocking the check. Now, he has to do that. If he goes to d8 with his king, then he gets checkmated. Can you see how he gets checkmated? Bishop takes c7 would be checkmate. So he can't play king d8 in this situation, or he gets checkmated. So he must play bishop e7, which is what he did. And now a very, very clever move by Shirov, what's called a line clearing move. He played his bishop to d6. Now, this is a one position now for Shirov. He's won the game. He can't move this bishop, it's pinned. And so the threat, the move he's threatening to play, is to put his queen up here, which would be checkmate. So that's the threat. One way to try to get out of it is to play c takes, the pawn takes, and now in that situation you might be able to get out of it, but no, it's still checkmate, so no, that doesn't work for him, does it? So what else has he really got after bishop d6? The only way to avoid that threat is to unpin this bishop. At the moment it's pinned by the powerful rook, so he unpins it. He plays king d8, and so now if you played queen f8, that would not be effective because of bishop takes. Or would it? If you play queen down and give check and the bishop takes, how would you follow up as white? You play rook takes and you still have a very strong position. But there's an even stronger way to continue in this situation. Can you see it? What would happen if you played that move? If you played the queen down, let's have a look. Because that's actually what Shirov did. Queen f8 check, forces the bishop takes, and now this move you can checkmate. The rook is covering all of these squares. What's the move? If you need more time, press pause, but the winning move is bishop takes c7 checkmate. So, when he plays queen f8, he's got plenty of different ways to win the game. But that's the quickest and most powerful way to do it. So the point of this game is that these rooks became very, very powerful very quickly. Rooks belong on open files. So this file here with no pawns, that's an open file. This is an open file. And that's where you should place your rooks. You may not need to sacrifice as many pieces as Shirov did to get an active game. Your opponents will be a lot weaker than Lipinski, and it might be that they allow you to work out, or allow you to take the open files with your rooks, or it may be that you can work out which files will become open, and that you can get your rooks there first. So always remember, rooks belong on open files, and this game is a great example of how active pieces that are controlling a lot of squares, attacking a lot of important squares, particularly near the opponent's king, are more important than the material count. So black has a better material count, but look at these pieces that never actually moved, never actually did anything in the game, and if you count up those points, you'll see that it's more than the material that was sacrificed, which is why white was able to go on and win the game. So always try to use your rooks powerfully. If you're using your rooks powerfully and your opponent isn't, it can be like having an extra queen, which of course is a huge advantage.